Welcome to lecture 4 of Python module, and in this video we will be covering if-else statement, for loop, while loop and words like break, continue, pass. So let's begin. Let's first talk about Python if-else statement. The if statement is used in Python to execute a block of code only if a certain condition is true. It follows the structure if condition. So here condition is an expression that evaluates to either true or false. If the condition is true, the code block inside if statement is executed, otherwise it is skipped. Additional clauses like else and elif are used to handle alternative condition. We will be seeing the use of them in few minutes. So let's see an example of if statement. So in this code, it checks if the variable number is greater than 0 using the if statement. If it is true, the message number is positive is printed regardless of the condition. The message the if statement is easy is always printed. Why? Because it's not inside any condition and it's a part of a code. So if we are running this code, we will see that our number is greater than 0, of course. So both the print statements will be executed, as you can see here. Now let's see the use of else condition with if. So the if else condition allows you to handle alternative condition and perform different action based on those conditions. It is commonly used when you want to execute one block of code when a condition is true and a different block of code when the condition is false. If can be used individually, but else is only used when if statement is present. One thing to notice. So let's see an example of if-else statement. So this code checks if the variable number is greater than 0 using the if-else statement. If it is true, the number or the message positive number is printed. Otherwise, if it is false, the message negative number is printed. Regardless of the condition, the message this statement is always executed is always printed. So when I'm running this code, we will be getting positive number and this statement is always executed. The number is greater than 10, which satisfies the if condition. So now let's move forward and see an example of elif statement. So what it is? So elif allows for making choices between multiple alternatives based on different conditions. It provides a way to handle more than two possible outcomes. So if condition checks only one condition, if you are using else, now you can use actually two block of codes for different logic or two conditions. But if you have more than two conditions, you can use elif in between. So let's see an example of this. Okay, so before seeing an example, it's important for you to know that the conditions are checked in order and the code block corresponding to the first true condition is executed. So for example, if condition is true, so we won't be checking elif conditions, rest of the elif conditions. So you have to be thoughtful while writing the conditions, what to write first. And second thing, if none of the condition is true, the code block within the else statement is executed as a fallback option. Let's see an example of elif. So the code checks the value of a variable number. If it is greater than 0, the message positive number is printed. If it is equal to 0, the message 0 is printed. And if it is neither greater than 0 nor equal to 0, the message negative number is printed, which we have mentioned in else condition. This statement is always executed, is printed regardless of condition, because this is not bounded in any condition and is a part of code. Since our number is equal to 0, we have assigned 0 to it, else condition is satisfied, therefore 0, and this statement is always executed will be our output. Now let's see nested if condition. So let's see what does this code do. So it checks the value of a variable number. If it is greater than or equal to 0, it enters the outer if statement. Inside the outer if statement, there is an inner if statement. If number is equal to 0, it print number is 0. Otherwise, if it is not equal to 0, it print number is positive. If number is negative, it print number is negative as it falls in else. Basically, this code handles nested if statement to evaluate multiple conditions within each other. Now let's move towards Python loop. So loop are used to repeat a block of code. For example, if we want to show a message 100 times, then we will be using loop instead of writing that message 100 times. So we have two kind of loop, for loop and while loop. A for loop in Python is used to iterate over sequence like tuple, list, string, etc. See the syntax of for loop. So val is our variable that takes on each value from the sequence one by one. So the intended block inside the for loop is executed for each value of val in the sequence. Let's see the basic example of for loop. The code uses the for loop to iterate over each character in the string Python and print each character on a separate line. Why separate line? Because print has default value of int parameter as a new line, that is \n, which we have already talked about in a previous video. So this is how the code execute. So x is first p, then it prints p, then x is y, which prints y, then x is t, which prints t. So you can see that x is taking every character as its value one by one. So we have one function range in Python which is used a lot of time in for loop. So what it is? So it is used to generate a sequence of number and for loop iterate over the sequence, right? So it is commonly used in for loop to specify the number of iteration or to generate a sequence of value. See an example of range and how different ways we can declare range. So I'm creating a variable values and I'm calling a function range and then passing 4 inside it, printing value. So let's run this code. So as you can see that it is giving me range 0 to 4. So one thing to notice, if you are not defining the start, it is automatically taking default value as 0. So let's see an example of range and how in different ways we can declare it. So here I'm calling for loop and there's a variable num which will iterate over the range 5. So what does this 5 mean? It is from 0 to 5 where 0 is included and 5 is excluded. So when I'm printing num, it will print 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. That's it. Basically, you can also declare the start and end, or you can declare start, end and the jumps or the steps to count. Therefore, let's see an example of this. So here starting is 2 and ending is 8. Although 2 is included and 8 is excluded, so num will be printing from 2 to 7. So as you can see in the output as well, we are getting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and not 8. Why? Because starting is included and end is excluded in range function. Now when we are declaring these steps as well, from 1 to 10, where 1 is included, 10 is excluded, it will be printing 1. Then 2 steps ahead, it will be printing 3. Then plus 2, 5. This is how you can declare range. Either you can only specify end. Here you are specifying start and end, and here you are specifying start, end and the jumps. So let's talk or see an example of range. So here I'm creating a variable value which is storing range 4, that is from 0 to 4, and when I'm iterating my variable I in value, it will be iterating from 0 to 4 excluding 4. So when I will be printing value of I, it will be from 0 to 3 as we saw earlier. So we have seen for loop. For loop is used to iterate over the sequence. We can also use range if the total number of iterations are known. Let's see while loop. Python while loop is used to run a code block until a certain condition is met. So the syntax of while loop is you will be writing key while and then the condition for which you want while loop to get executed. So we will be initializing the variable before saying while loop, because whatever condition you are putting on the variable, it's important to declare it first. So like I is initialized as 1 and n is equals to 5, and the condition is that if I is less than or equal to n, we will be printing I and then incrementing it. So let's run this code and see, dry run it. So basically my starting value of I is 1, which is less than 5. So it gets printed as you can see in the outcome, and then I is incremented to 2. Since 2 is less than 5, it gets printed and then it is incremented to 3. Now 3 is less than 5, it gets printed and then it is incremented to 4. 4 is less than equal to 5, it gets printed and then it is incremented to 5. 5 is also less than or equal to 5, so it's get printed and I is equals to now 6. Now 6 is not less than equal to 5 while condition is not true, therefore while condition block is not executed. So now you have seen both the for loop and while loop. Let's compare when to use what. The for loop is typically used when the number of iterations is predetermined or known, such as iterating over a sequence or a specific range of value. It is useful when you have a fixed number of times you wanted to repeat a block of code. On the other hand, the while loop is used when the number of iterations is unknown or determined by a condition. It continues to execute a block of code as long as the specified condition remains true. So when you have condition, use while, and when you have number of iterations known, use for, and we use for and while to repeat same code many number of times. The basic idea about loop. Now let's talk about break, continue and pass keyword. The break statement is used to terminate the loop immediately when it is encountered. So it terminates the loop as the break term suggests. And the continue statement is used to skip the current iteration of the loop and the control flow of the program goes to the next iteration. The example of break and continue. So in this example, a for loop is used to iterate over the numbers 0 to 4 because range is 5. So it is including 0 and excluding 5. It will run from 0 to 4. When the loop variable I is equal to 3, the break statement is encountered. So this immediately terminates the loop. Therefore, only numbers 0, 1 and 2 are printed. I is not equal to 4 because when I is equal to 3, our loop gets terminated. And in this example, another for loop is used to iterate over the numbers 0 to 4. When the loop variable I is equal to 3, the continue statement is encountered. This kept the remaining code in the current iteration and moved to the next iteration. As a result, the number 3 is skipped, but for loop is still running. And what numbers will be printed? It will print 0, 1, 2 and 4. Once you have seen the example of both break and continue, let's summarize. The break statement allows you to exit a loop, while the continue statement allows you to skip the current iteration and proceed with the next iteration. These statements actually provide control over the flow of a loop based on specific conditions. So one thing to remember, break and continue keyword are only used inside loop. If you are using it inside if condition, which is not inside for loop or while loop, it will throw us an error. Now let's see the last topic of this lecture, which is a pass statement. So the pass statement in Python is a null statement that serves as a placeholder for future code. It is primarily used when you want to define a block of code syntactically but don't want to write any implementation yet. So in this example, if the condition n greater than 10 is true, the pass statement is encountered and it essentially does nothing. However, it allows the code to be syntactically correct and the interpreter does not throw any error. So when I'm running this code, it is printing hello, despite because it's not inside any condition and it's a part of our code. Now let's see if I'm writing comment instead of pass, what will happen. Since this is not syntactically correct, it will give me an error. Why? Because it's saying that you have declared if statement, but then you are writing nothing inside it. Therefore, I suppose that this print statement must lie inside if condition, which is not our intention. If you don't want to write any logic inside if, else, for, while, you can use pass function if you don't want to have any error, because comment and pass both does nothing, but comment is ignored by interpreter and pass is not ignored by interpreter, and therefore this does not throw us any error. So overall, the pass statement is a convenient way to temporarily handle empty or unfinished code block without causing syntax error, and it serves as a reminder for future code implementation. Revise what all we learned in this video. We saw if statement, which we can use individually, and if condition is true, the block inside if condition is implemented. We can also use else clause if we want to handle two conditions or two logics. So one logic lies in if condition and one lies in the else block. So if condition is not true, else block is executed. We can also use elif condition if we have more than two scenarios or two alternatives. So this was the example of elif, and one thing to remember that it checks in order. So you need to be very careful when you are writing conditions, what to write first and what to write next. So saw Python nested if statement where we are using if statement inside if statement. Then we have Python loop, we have for loop, which we use when we want to iterate over the sequence. And we also saw the function range, which excludes the end and includes the start. And you can declare it in many ways. So these are the three ways which we saw in the example. And we also saw while loop, which we use when we have conditions. So when we are declaring conditions, it's important to initialize our variable and to increment it inside the while variable, while loop. We also saw the difference between while and for loop. So for loop is used when the number of iterations are known, and while loop is used when the number of iterations are unknown. So here we deal with condition. We saw break, continue, which we use inside for or while loop. And then finally, we saw the past statement, which we can use inside if, else, for, while, anywhere, and it acts as a placeholder for a future code. But the only advantage is that it is not ignored by interpreter, and therefore, as you can see that past statement in Python is not ignored by the interpreter, and it does not throw us any error. So this is the advantage of using past. So that's all in this video.